Hey there! Making today's video actually was a lot of fun and really exciting because we are taking a super extended look at the gaming capability of AMD's new integrated graphics card, the RX 780M, which I've tested using the Ryzen 9 7940HS of an ASUS TUF A15 laptop, in which I deactivated the RTX 4060. I also upgraded the stock 16GB DDR5 4800MHz RAM, which was 2 times 8GB RAM sticks, and swapped them for two 16GB DDR5 5600MHz Kingston Fury RAM sticks for a total of 32GB of RAM with a latency of CL40 to achieve a noticeable better experience. And that is also the maximum RAM speed that I was able to use for this laptop and this CPU, as it only supports 5600MHz. PS, did you know that I also have a dedicated video in which I compare these two RAM configurations, so check that out afterwards if you're interested. And make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Now, this RX 780M's performance depends a lot on the speed and total amount of system RAM, since integrated GPUs don't come with dedicated VRAM, like for example an NVIDIA RTX graphic card does. So this video is supposed to give you an idea of an average 780M, as I suppose it will come with even faster RAM in future handhelds and thin and light laptops. But sometimes it will surely come with slower RAM as well. And of course, the Ryzen 9 7940HS is a very fast CPU by itself, and the 780M will surely be paired with slower Ryzen U CPUs as well. But then again, the total TDP could probably be even higher, so in other laptops the performance could even be a bit higher as well. It is also important to know that 32GB helped a lot in many games, and only using 16GB would definitely have an impact on many of today's games, as you will later see in the OSD that I displayed throughout all the games. All the tested titles of this video have been benchmarked at 1080p with only one exception. And I was using AMD's FSR on quality mode in all games in which it was available, since on a laptop screen you won't notice it that much anyhow, and it's usually the best way to boost your FPS for relatively little loss in quality, in my opinion. I recorded all games with a capture card on a desktop PC to make sure there was no FPS loss due to the recording. I was trying to hit at least 30 FPS or more than 60 if possible, and tried to find the settings that I personally would prefer if I was using this GPU for gaming. I have been really pleasantly surprised by the performance in so many games. It's just astonishing of what laptops, handhelds and desktop PCs without the dedicated GPU will be able to do from now on. Before we start, one last hint. The total CPU power was the only power reading that I could analyze, as it was not possible to show the wattage of the graphics unit only. And now let's jump right into the games, which are being presented in alphabetical order for a better usability. Feel free to use the chapters in the timeline to jump through the games.
Since Assassin's Creed Valhalla begins with an A, it will be today's first game. And at 1080p and medium settings I saw a very decent average of around 47 to 55 FPS depending on the scene. Now, I am not going to talk about the 1% low in this video, as you can see them for yourself in the OSD, and they highly depend on how long a game was played, as it's usually getting better the longer you play a game until all the shaders and sound effects have been loaded for a first time. But however, the game is definitely playable with a good graphical fidelity at 1080p on an integrated APU, which is kinda crazy. I was actually using the high preset with FSR on ultra quality for Anno 1800, as around 30 FPS are most certainly enough for this rather slow paced game, and I would definitely prefer better graphics over more performance in this title. Of course, in higher settings, changing the camera angle to something flatter will cause the FPS to drop a lot, but that's not something that you would usually do while actually playing this title. I was using medium settings for Age of Empires 4, which resulted in a fluid average FPS of around 68 FPS, depending on what's going on the battlefield and how many units you have, etc. You definitely don't need a dedicated GPU for this game anymore, and it still looks alright in my opinion. I guess the CPU would also be fit for really large battles as well, thanks to its 8 threads and 8 cores and 16 threads. I was using medium settings with only little anti-aliasing for Apex Legends at 1080p and saw a very playable average FPS of around 95. I guess that's absolutely good enough for some casual gaming, but I bet even professional players could actually gain some victories with this performance. As you can see, the gameplay and the frame time graph have been pretty smooth as well. Ark Survival Evolved is always a bit disappointing graphic-wise in my opinion. On low to around medium settings at 1080p the game looks really blurry even with anti-aliasing, and the performance is not optimal. I don't know if this is related to the early drivers, but I saw an average of around 36 FPS in this case. And Ark needs an insane 123 GB of data to download. Jesus, not worth it in my opinion. I mean, it's playable I guess, but I'd rather jump to the next game in that case. I was using the low preset at 1080p for Battlefield 2042 and saw an average of around 55 FPS. It did feel fluid enough to enjoy it for some casual gaming, though I'm pretty sure more professional players would prefer not to play it that way. The 1% low have been pretty okay from the start though, which is something I usually don't see, though I sometimes really forgot that I'm not actually utilizing a dedicated GPU but the RX 780M instead. I really think that's kinda insane. I was also testing the full Half-Life 1 remake Black Mesa at the highest settings, which was getting me a super high average FPS of around 150. And you could probably expect such performance for most older games on the market. So if you're getting a laptop while having a fast desktop PC, it still could be more than fast enough to work your way through your pile of shame. I was using the low preset plus medium textures for Remedy's control and saw a very playable performance of around 50 FPS on average, with a mostly flat frame time graph, while the game still provides nice visuals. Despite its great DLSS implementation, unfortunately the game does not offer FSR, because then a stable 60 FPS would have easily been possible. In CSGO I was using medium settings and saw an absolutely sick average FPS of 190. Well, I guess nobody could blame their stupid slow laptop anymore, could they? As you might know, CSGO has issues with the 1% low FPS, as they usually don't mean that the game is stuttery despite being significantly lower than the average FPS, but once more perfectly playable in a very fluid way. And Cyberpunk 2077 ran actually okay at the medium preset with an average of 47 FPS thanks to FSR on quality. We all know that Cyberpunk is one of the most demanding games out there despite it being already 2 years old. But the FPS didn't even drop below 30, not even when driving in crowded areas in the city center. And in the outskirts and some less demanding scenes I actually saw 50 FPS and more. That's just absolutely incredible in my opinion. Most GTX 1060 laptops can't run the game this good, mostly due to their CPU and RAM, but still, I just looked it up, it's exactly the same performance I was getting when testing the 35W version of the RTX 3050 back in 2021. PS, please let me know which game amazed you the most in the comments. Thanks. As Diablo 4 had another open beta weekend while I was testing the RX 780M, I wanted to see how it would cope at 1080p and medium settings and saw an average FPS of around 65. The frame time graph looked a little weird though, which could always depend on the game still being a beta and the drivers not being optimized for unreleased games. However, we can expect the game to be perfectly playable on this APU. I saw an average of around 50 to 55 FPS in Elden Ring on the low preset at 1080p with pretty good 1% low, and the game would surely be playable from start to end in this manner. It doesn't look that great due to the bad anti-aliasing implementation, but it's definitely fluid enough to react fast enough to boss and enemy moves, I guess. PS, I was also testing the medium preset, which lowered the average FPS to around 45 while delivering a noticeable boost considering the graphics. Considering that Dark Souls 1 initially was bound to 30 FPS, 45 FPS really feels a lot smoother. I was using the benchmark tool for F122 at high settings with FSR in quality mode and saw a perfectly fluid and playable average FPS of 85. Combined with grade 1% lows, this certainly is another title that is working more or less perfectly on the RX 780M. It really comes in handy that so many games support FSR2 these days, despite it being of a lesser quality than DLSS. But on a 15-inch or even smaller screen, it doesn't really matter. In Far Cry 6, I saw an average of around 49 FPS and a grade 1% low on medium settings and 1080p native. I actually only found out later that it provided FSR 1.0, which would further bump the average FPS to around 67 FPS in ultra quality mode. I mean stable 60 FPS. On medium settings, in a recent AAA shooter, on a CPU, in a laptop. Come on, how good is that? PS, hey Intel, what's your answer to this? I hope we're going to find that out soon enough. I was testing FIFA 2022 at medium settings just to find out that the average FPS was insanely high with around 175 FPS at 1080p and therefore changed the preset to the absolute maximum, which still resulted in over 130 FPS on average for the gameplay. Some replays and other camera shenanigans between plays would only render at lower FPS, but that actually doesn't matter. I'm 100% sure that FIFA 2023 would run almost as good, but I don't own it, so you'll just have to take my word for it, I guess. Nope, this is not The Witcher 3, but I was using low settings combined with epic view distance and medium shadows for Fortnite, Battle Royale, and saw an average of around 96 FPS, which is, once more, perfectly playable in my opinion. There were a few hiccups here and there, as you can probably see in the frame time spikes in the displayed OSD on the left side, but I hope these would be fixed with future driver updates. PS, don't forget to like the video if you are enjoying the content and consider subscribing as well if you haven't done that. Thanks! I was using the high preset in Forza Horizon 5 and saw a good average of around 75 FPS, which is a bit less than what ETA Prime was achieving in his video, but he was actually only testing the game in areas which would achieve higher FPS. I was driving around for around 15 minutes on the whole map to achieve this result, and the areas with more vegetation definitely have a little less FPS. Great experience though, nonetheless. I personally would totally play the game that way. In Genshin Impact, I was using the high settings combined with FSR and saw an average of around 55 FPS and a decent 1% low, so that would be once more absolutely playable on an RX 780M. But I didn't expect anything else, as most free-to-play titles aren't that hardware demanding, and you all probably know that you can play this game on entry-level smartphones from 4 years ago. I don't personally play it myself, but I always enjoy the graphics and the atmosphere. I saw an average of around 50 FPS in God of War using the low preset combined with FSR on quality mode. There are some scenes in which the FPS drop to around 45 FPS, but it's always playable nonetheless. I guess we could say we're seeing graphics on a PlayStation 4 level on this GPU, at least the non-pro version. Especially if we consider that we could always tweak the settings a bit if one is okay with a capped and stable 30 FPS. I guess such a testing video can't be completed without GTA 5, so I fired that up as well. I saw an average of around 85 to 90 FPS on high settings with FXAA enabled and a basically perfect 1% low, so absolutely no stuttering here. But then again, this is an older title and many slower PCs can run this in a decent way these days. I was using the low preset and no anti-aliasing in Hunt Showdown, and the RX 780M achieved an average of around 55 FPS and a decent 1% low. The game doesn't look super good that way, but I would once more still call this playable enough for some casual gaming if that title is your thing. Please forgive my noobish gameplay as I don't actively play Hunt myself. My doctor said it's not good for my blood pressure. I have to say, the result in Hogwarts Legacy really amazed me. On low settings, combined with FSR and quality, I saw an average of around 54 FPS and a rather stable frame time graph and almost no heavy stutters like on many other systems I've tested this game on. And it was pretty stable from the very first moment. I guess that is due to the big 32GB RAM the RX 780M had access to in this case. As you can see here, it was using up to 26GB in this title. That is combined system RAM and VRAM of course, but still. I guess 32GB is the way to go for APU starting today, if AAA titles are on your to-do list. I was also testing a lighter indie title like Life is Strange 3, in which I was using the very high preset as 30 FPS is totally fine in this game. So I saw an average of around 35 to 45 FPS depending on the scene, with a okay 1% low as well, while looking graphically pleasing in my opinion, so I guess that most indie titles in this manner could be perfectly played on the RX 780M. I expected League of Legends to run pretty good, so at the maximum settings I saw an average of around 198 with a very high 1% low of 157. Again, forgive my playstyle in this title as I had never really played this game for a longer while, and the last time I really did was around 13 years ago. Oh, by the way, I also apologize for most of today's games being in German, as changing all the games to English just takes a lot of time if you have to do it in 50 games, as you often have to download further data. But however, lighter esport games like League of Legends and Dota 2 will run perfectly fine on the 780M. And I'm very confident that this will also remain valid for similar games in the future. I also tried to run Microsoft Flight Simulator, so after hours of downloading I finally made it into the options menu, and then the game crashed every time I tried to start anything. Sorry. Maybe that can be fixed with a driver update, but I'm sure it will be playable at 30 FPS on lower settings. As the RX 780M officially has the capability to use ray tracing, I tried an easy title like Minecraft with activated ray tracing, but it was unplayable even at the lowest settings. So unfortunately this feature doesn't make any sense despite maybe 4 screenshots. But of course Minecraft without ray tracing would work perfectly fine with around 40 chunks visibility and higher settings. Even 80 chunks would be possible with around 40 FPS. I didn't install any mods though, as I'm not really familiar with what's good and popular, etc. But I'm sure that the large RAM and the fast CPU would help a bit here. PS flat earthers clearly are idiots, as you can see here. That's proof enough, I guess. The world is a globe, doofus. Need for Speed Heat wasn't running as good as Forza Horizon 5 did. On the medium preset at 1080p I saw averages between 50 and 55 FPS, though the FPS were pretty smooth and it's still playable of course. But for a stable 60 FPS using the low graphics preset would obviously be necessary. I didn't play this game at all yet, so all I can show you is the intro race and some free roaming in the open world. In No Man's Sky I saw an average of around 50 FPS on the planets and 90 FPS in outer space using the second of the 4 graphic presets combined with FSR quality. I've experienced some hiccups from time to time and the frame time graph wasn't as flat as in other games, but it's once more very playable and the graphics are really good for an integrated GPU. Surely a better experience than what Star Citizen had to offer, as you will see later. I was using the medium preset without any resolution scaling for Overwatch 2, which resulted in an average of around 96 FPS on this escort map. The 1% lows have been pretty good as well, and stuttering did not occur when testing the game. Sure, it's not 144 FPS for a 144Hz monitor, but I guess you would not expect this from an APU yet in all games. At least at 1080p with medium settings. I'm pretty sure it would be possible if I would have lowered the resolution a bit and choose lower settings. I was testing the beta version of Park Beyond at 1080p with medium settings and saw a perfect average of over 75 FPS, at least in a not super crowded park. I don't know how the game will behave in really big and complex parks, but I think it would still be doable thanks to the fast CPU and the big system RAM in this case. I really think that all current simulation and building games just like that would run pretty good on the RX 780M. So if that is your thing, you could really be happy with only running on this APU by AMD. A Plague Tale Requiem was one of the more demanding games of today's video, and even with low settings and resolution scaling on quality, I only saw 40 to around 45 FPS on average. It's more like a retro console experience, but still doable once more, while still looking decent enough since it's a slower single-player third-person game. In most scenes, the frame rate was stable and the frame time graph didn't show too many spikes overall. Planet Coaster is actually pretty tough to benchmark, as huge parks will be bottlenecked by the engine of the game itself. So I was testing a simple and small pre-built empty park on medium settings and saw between 35 and 45 FPS on average. The playability of this game really depends on the used park more than on the actual PC. So let's just jump right to the next game instead. I was testing PUBG at 1080p with low settings, not the very low settings, and saw an average of around 73 FPS and a pretty smooth frame time graph, resulting in a decent playability. PUBG was one of the first games I ever benchmarked on this channel back in the day while using a GeForce 840M that didn't even achieve 30 FPS at 1080p and the lowest settings. And now we're getting 4 times the performance with an integrated GPU. Though we have to acknowledge that PUBG did get quite a crazy amount of optimization over the years and really isn't that hardware hungry anymore. Thanks to FSR2 on quality mode, once again, the demanding AAA title Red Dead Redemption 2 ran almost shockingly well on medium settings with textures set to high. I saw an average of 55 FPS and a very good 1% low with a super smooth experience overall. I recently did have more trouble playing that game on the new RTX 4000 series than on this iGPU, considering the stuttering. That's just sick. Oh, sorry Arthur. That was tactless. Next. Low settings combined with FSR resulted in around 45 FPS on average in the brand new Redfall. Though I'm really hoping that newer drivers and game updates would improve the experience, as I really think the game should run better considering the graphics we're getting. Also, as you can see, the frame time graph was pretty stuttery and sometimes, well, not flat. So let's just hope for the best, shall we? I actually expected Rocket League to run really well, so on the quality settings I saw an average of 95 FPS at 1080p. It's absolutely playable, though the 1% low could be a bit better and the frame time graph could be a bit smoother. Maybe driver issues once more, I don't know. But nonetheless, you could definitely enjoy this game using the RX 780M for some casual gaming or maybe even professional gaming, considering that on the consoles it runs with 60 FPS as well, and those guys seem to be doing fine as well. I was using a resolution scaling of 50% combined with the very high preset for Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, which resulted in a very high average of 145 FPS in this single player level. So that game actually did hit the magical 144 Hz mark, I guess. Seeing one of today's best performances in all tested games, I guess you could even play this on a more sophisticated level with integrated graphics in this case, and come on, that's just incredible, right? And Star Citizen actually was the only game in which I really had to use 720p to get somewhat playable frame times and FPS. At least for this shooter part, which didn't run all too great, as you can see. The open world part is even more demanding and would often not even achieve 30 FPS on average, with some severe stuttering. I guess this could become a bit better over time once all the shaders are loaded, but well, I think that game is a story of its own. Trying out the rally course actually resulted in around 60 FPS though. And I have to add that I think that flying in space would actually run a bit better than the first-person part on the planets. StarCraft 2 was no issue in a 2-player match on ultra settings with an average of around 70 FPS. Of course, bigger matches would be more demanding, but the limiting factor is probably not the GPU, as you can see when taking a look at the GPU usage in the OSD. I guess even professional players would be perfectly okay with using the RX 780M. But then again, the game is 12 years old, so next. Subnautica ran pretty good as well at 1080p and medium settings. I saw an average of 59 FPS and a decent 1% low, and it was a good experience overall. It's just so crazy that almost no matter what you throw at the 780M, it can basically handle everything in one way or the other. I was testing The Last of Us with 2 settings. First, the low preset combined with FSR on quality mode. That resulted in an average of around 50 FPS and very acceptable 1% lows actually. It really ran better than expected once again. And they even fixed the horrible looking textures on the low preset, so that would absolutely be playable just fine. But I also wanted to see if it was possible to use the high preset combined with FSR quality and a 30 FPS cap, and what can I say, it actually worked, wow. I mean, I know it's 2023 and people want more than 30 FPS, but come on, this game on high settings, without a dedicated GPU, that's just plain awesomeness. Well done, AMD. I also quickly tested Trackmania as well on high settings, which gave me around 80 to 90 FPS depending on the specific track with perfectly high 1% lows. Nothing would stop you from playing this game on the RX 780M, but I guess that was expected. Me personally, I'm not playing this game, so let's just jump right to the next game in the list, as we are actually getting close to 50 games now. In my opinion, Valheim is looking pretty great despite its old school pixel look. There is just something that I dig about the lighting and the atmosphere. On medium settings, at 1080p, which you can see here, I saw an average of around 43 FPS. The frame time graph wasn't perfectly stable, though it felt fluid enough if you ask me. Due to popular demand, I of course added Valorant, and hey, who would have thought? It was the best running game of today, with an amazing average of 230 FPS on medium settings and a very high 1% low during the whole match. I mean, that is also thanks to the very fast CPU of course, and on the less powerful U series it would surely be a bit less FPS, but still, that's a lot of FPS, making sure your input lag is super low. I was testing Warzone 2.0 on the low preset combined with medium textures and FSR on quality, and actually saw a very playable 76 FPS with basically no stuttering. As expected, the RAM usage is pretty high with around 23 GB, and it would most certainly not run that well with 16 GB only. But still, that is one of the more astonishing results I got when benchmarking the RX 780M. Or did you actually expect that? Please let me know in the comments. I was using the old DirectX 11 mode for The Witcher 3, as the DirectX 12 wrapper is really bad and just eats FPS for breakfast. So on medium settings with a lot of additional features, I saw an average of 45 FPS with a decent 1% low and only a few hiccups here and there, while the game still looks neat after all these years. And any system that runs The Witcher 3 in a playable way has every right to exist. But I'm really sure it would have run even much better if CD Projekt Red did not destroy the performance with the next gen update though. That's a bit of a shame in my opinion. I was actually testing World of Warcraft as well, and I went for the highest possible settings, but also deactivated anti-aliasing just to see what was possible. The FPS depend a lot on the area you are in, so let's just have a look at some scenes without commenting it too much. I was pretty surprised by the high RAM usage though, to be honest, didn't expect that at all. But of course you could expect much higher FPS on more medium-like settings. I really wonder if the game would still run on the very first system I ever played it on back in 2005, which probably was a single core AMD Athlon XP with like 2 GB of RAM and a GeForce FX 5700, like literally 18 years ago. Damn. Okay, and the last 3 games for today will be a bit special, as often people ask me about emulation. I also fired up CEMU and some Wii U games, as that is the only emulator I know how to use. Well, so Super Mario 3D World is such a fun and neat looking game, and using a 1080p mod it just ran perfectly fine with a stable 60 FPS, and the GPU was actually really bored, as you can see here. Absolutely no problem for the Ryzen 9 and the RX 780M, I guess. The same was true for Mario Kart 8, which ran buttery smooth as well at 1080p, with the RX 780M being bored once more. The great thing for the handhelds will be that these games don't need the full wattage to run perfectly fine, and that will allow for really great battery runtimes. I haven't been able to get Zelda Breath of the Wild running as its intended speed, as I don't know on how to install it properly and run all the upgrades, sorry. But as you can see here, the performance should actually be okay once you manage to run the game as its intended speed. The hiccups are only due to the shaders loading for the first time, which can also be avoided if threaded right, if I'm not mistaken. Just let me know in the comments that I'm an emulator noob and I can take it.
Wow, and that's it, 50 games on the 780M. I was comparing some of today's results with the Asus Swift X from 2021 that sported the 35W version of the RTX 3050, and the results are often more or less identical. That's just wow. I also have a dedicated video in which I compare it with the GTX 1650 Mobile, so check that one out as well. But this video took forever to make. Writing the script, recording, cutting, editing, etc. So if you enjoyed the video, it would mean a lot to me if you liked and or even subscribed if you haven't done that already. I will probably take a few days off and regain some energy now. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye bye and cheers.